panelists. Good evening to you both. And let's begin with the Alberta Next panel, back on the road this week. And among the issues up for audience debate Tuesday evening in Fort McMurray, pension plans.
Poll after poll has shown that the vast majority of Albertans support the Canadian pension plan and want to stay in the plan. Why does your government continue to go against the clear wishes of Albertans and pursue a pension plan that we don't want?
The more I read and the more I dig into the truth of the Canada pension plan, I would just encourage everybody to do that. It's pathetic and it's gross mismanagement.
The panel is gathering feedback from Albertans for potential referendum questions while also addressing grievances with the federal government that the Premier has said are inspiring separatist sentiment. The panel in Lloydminster this evening. Chaldeans, no protests outside the front doors, as had been the case at the three previous events. And most in attendance expressed approval for the government's 6 proposals, such as pulling out of the CPP and ditching the Mounties for provincial police. How much does location play into the tone of these town halls?
Yeah, Michael, Fort McMurray is friendly territory for the UCP government. So, of course, the reception was much more favorable, but there's still, a lot of animation around the CPP. I think if you look at all the next panel sessions, I think the CPP is the issue that animates the attendees. So I think the government has a lot of work to do on that particular file because people are not convinced that there's a benefit to shifting from the existing system to the APP. So, but yeah, you're right. I think Fort McMurray was a favorable spot. And I think generally people were pleased with the government's efforts to enhance Alberta's powers and position in the federal system.
John, other issues of note were raised, questions, criticism on things like COVID vaccine policy, ballooning classroom sizes. How hard-pressed will the Premier and her government be in keeping this on the topic of contending with the feds as these town halls move forward?
I mean, the subject of, the Alberta Next panel, right? Like it's about the government's proposals to make Alberta more like Quebec in terms of its position within the Federation. But there are other issues at play. And one of the big criticisms against this government, even from some Conservatives, is that they've lost the plot in terms of, the actual issues that are facing, the vast majority of everyday Albertans. Like, K-12 kids are about to go back to school, and there might be either a strike or a lockout come September. And so, the cost of living crisis continues to be a thing. Housing shortages are still a thing. And so there's no shortage of other issues. And, one of the persistent criticisms of what the government's doing with these panels is that they're focusing on perhaps the wrong priorities that are facing most Albertans and what's really pressing at the moment.
Chaldeans, do you think these town halls are going in the direction the Smith government intended? What do you see the consultations accomplishing to this point?
Well, I think, Michael, these consultation efforts are designed to give people an opportunity to vent and hopefully maybe shape the government's approach in its future dealing with the county government. But there's also, I think, as John pointed out, issue management. You want to make sure that the panels are not overshadowing other important concerns of average Albertans. But I think overall, the main focus has been to shape Alberta's future in Canada. But on the government's right flank, there are people that are more antagonistic and want a push towards separation. So the government is caught in this vice. But I think what we're likely to see is a situation that happened with the previous panel that will generate a referendum question. But the question is, will Canada pay attention to what happens? And the danger is, if nothing happens, then there will be that push by the extreme elements for a separation effort.
All right. On that note, a separatist party is calling on the Premier to go directly to a binding referendum on Alberta independence. The Republican Party of Alberta, which fielded candidates in the June by-elections, issued a statement Monday suggesting the government already has the authority to schedule a referendum without requiring a petition. In response to questions on the matter, the Premier has said, while her government is working on a series of referendum questions to put to Albertans, as we discussed in the last segment, separation will not be one of those. Now, John, what do these actions of the Republican Party say to you about the state of debate and dialogue around this issue of independence? Why bring it back into the headlines at this point?
Well, this goes back to what Chaldeans was saying about how these panels are meant to provide people an opportunity to vent. It's sort of a pressure release valve to make sure that the pressure doesn't get too great. But, as Chaldeans also pointed out, there's a danger that it doesn't work. And that's what we're seeing from the Republican Party, which, in their comments about Danielle Smith having, the ability to put a binding referendum of separation. Well, but that's actually correct. She can do that. Does she want to do that? No. And she said as much that she doesn't, she didn't come out right and say that she opposes separation, right? But she did say that separation likely wouldn't solve a lot of the economic problems when it comes to like getting oil to Tidewater, for example, and might actually make that problem worse. And so what the Republican Party's actions are showing is that the government is losing or is having a very difficult time keeping that far right flank of its base happy. And that's why, some of them have split off and some of them are calling for separation.
Chaldeans, Thomas Lukaszyk's pro-Canada petition, it's off and running the past few weeks. More than 40 in-person locations alone on Tuesday collecting signatures. How much pressure do you see those efforts bringing to this whole separation and independence push?
Well, I think essentially that Forever Canadian petition effort is basically to emphasize that the federal system is working essentially, and that Alberta has a place in Canada. It's a pro-Canada effort. I don't think that push is going to really shape the UCP government's approach. I think the UCP government sees this exercise as trying to get leverage for the province in its dealing with Ottawa. To the extent that we have these two opposing sides, you have the Project Prosperity and then the Forever Canadian. These are two opposite sides of this question. And the government has to manage it to make sure that its objectives of seeking a better deal in Canada are achieved. The last time they tried it with the referendum on equalization, Trudeau simply dismissed it. So the question is, what happens if a similar effort fails to bear fruition? What steps will Danielle Smith take to make sure that his vision of a sovereign Alberta within Canada is brought to fruition? So we'll have to wait and see, Michael.
We heard from trade expert Carlo Dade off the top tonight on evolving trade and tariff dynamics. Chaldeans, along with Tuesday's LeBlanc-Lutnick meeting, two other federal ministers and Canada's fentanyl czar set to meet today with U.S. Department of Justice officials. What's your read on these sudden talks after what seems like a lengthy period of silence?
Michael, I think we're seeing a new approach by the Carney government. I mean, the election campaign messaging around elbows up has completely dissipated because they realize that Mr. Trump is a different creature. You can't deal with him by trying to confront him that way. So they've capitulated, and the new approach is basically setting things up for the USMCA review, CUSMA review, which is coming up next year. There are still irritants here in these sectorial tariffs: steel, aluminum, copper, and the talks are designed to maybe get the Trump administration to move a little on these sectoral tariffs before we get to the USMCA review. So yeah, I think it's setting the stage. But what is interesting is that the dynamic has changed completely. Mr. Carney is now playing ball with Mr. Trump and hoping to get a better deal for Canada.
Okay, so John, on that point, backing off elbows up and then signaling the removal of reciprocal tariffs, how do these actions change the political dynamic around the Carney government's approach to contending with the Trump administration? And do you think that's what Canadians want?
So Chaldeans already touched on sort of the international relations aspect. I think in terms of the domestic picture, there will be some disappointment. There already has been some disappointment, particularly from the NDP and folks on the left. But it's difficult for folks on the right to be too critical because the folks on the right have always advocated for a softer, more conciliatory approach to dealing with Donald Trump. That is, with the exception of Pierre Poilievre during the federal election campaign, when he saw how much the elbows up messaging was working for Mark Carney. And so, Poilievre then pivoted to saying, well, I'm going to, go even harder against Trump than Carney. And it just wasn't believable. But I think, most folks who follow politics probably aren't too surprised that there was going to be this pivot. There's a domestic and an international audience when it comes to what's going on with this. And Carney needed to do what he did domestically to win. And now he's doing what he needs to do to try and get a deal. I don't think things would have been that much different had Poilievre won the election. I think we were always going to move to a more conciliatory stance with the United States. This is just how negotiations go. And I think while Carney's going to face some pushback and some criticism, I think what Canadians are really looking for is a deal. And if he gets a deal, then they will be happy with what was done to get it.
Chaldeans, on that point of pushback and criticism, how much of an inflection point do you think the Carney government is at right now with Canadians in its handling of tariff talks? Is now the time to be paying attention to what the polls are saying about support?
I think he's paying attention to the urgent call by Canadians for the government of Canada to get its act together, remove these internal barriers, look for other sources of market. So I see he's gone to Europe, and I give him credit for this. He's now discussing the possibility of a deal with Germany on critical minerals. And the business case that Mr. Trudeau dismissed on LNG, he seems to be open to that. He's talking about developing ports. But he needs to go back and take a look at some of the policies that Mr. Trudeau introduced. I mean, like a tanker ban. If you want to develop new ports and you have a tanker ban, it's kind of go loggerheads against each other in terms of strategy. So I think Mr. Carney is beginning to try to address some of the concerns of Canadians. He's moved the Liberal Party, to the center, being pragmatic. But he faced a big challenge within his own ranks on people that are still committed to the Trudeau policies that he's refusing to jettison.
John, the PM in Germany talking about investment in a new port in Churchill, infrastructure announcement of some sort set to be expected in the next couple of weeks. What's at stake there where Alberta is concerned?
Well, Churchill is one of the tidewater access points that Alberta has been pushing for. There are a lot of issues with it, as Carlo Dade had pointed out. And what Alberta really wants is that port in Kitimat. But it's a move in the right direction. And again, as Chaldean said, all of the Carney government's actions are part of him taking the Liberals back to their historical place, ideologically speaking, which is in the center in a pro-business sort of policy agenda. And that's what he's doing. And so it's a bit of a problem for Danielle Smith because, Carney is not the kind of environmentalist that Trudeau was. But whether anything actually happens remains to be seen, right? Like even the Germany deal is just, more of a memorandum of understanding rather than a full-fledged deal, right? So the proof will be in the pudding and what actually gets built and what actually gets accomplished.
Indeed, and we might find out in the next couple of weeks. Gentlemen, we have to leave it there for time. Great to see you both. Thank you kindly.
Thank you very much, Michael. Take care.